I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, fight for the unborn. The Supreme Court is set to issue a major ruling on a widely used abortion pill. We have team coverage and analysis. We also take a closer look at the High Court's consideration yesterday of a case involving religious freedom. Situation in Sudan. The Holy Father and a global religious organization are among those calling for an end to the violence. And happy to see this bill. Sports fans celebrate the good news about an NFL player who may be returning soon. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. Our top story tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court is facing the most significant abortion-related dispute since Roe versus Wade was overturned last summer. The justices are considering a lower court ruling that would place restrictions on access to an FDA-approved abortion drug. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us outside the Supreme Court with an update on when that decision may come down. Eric.
Well, good evening, Tracy. You know, anticipation was certainly in the air earlier today, but that all changed after a last-minute statement by Justice Samuel Alito. He did put out a statement saying that the use of the abortion pill without any restrictions will continue until at least Friday. One can only expect that possibly a decision will come down on Friday, but that was not confirmed by Justice Samuel Alito. Meanwhile, I did speak to a number of people who were standing outside the Supreme Court, many of them saying that they believe that this is an issue that should be taken out of the courts and it's an individual decision.
It's been vetted. I think the FDA has done its appropriate research, and I think it should be left to the FDA, who are the experts in this area, and the expertise should be left to them, not to a court to decide whether or not it's safe or not.
Meanwhile, across the street, lawmakers are also weighing in.
This case marks just the latest assault in the MAGA crusade on reproductive freedom. Republicans have one goal, a nationwide abortion ban.
They aspire all the time, domestically and internationally, to abortion on demand right to the moment of birth and even after birth, to ensure that if the child survives, he or she will be killed.
Pro-Life Caucus co-chair Congressman Chris Smith tells me he believes the justices will side with the pro-life community because the FDA approved mifepristone hastily and has spent decades now removing what few safeguards were left. He agrees with the amicus brief sent to the justices by Alliance Defending Freedom and Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, which gave evidence that 1 in 5 women who undergo a chemical abortion will suffer complications, 4 times higher than a surgical abortion.
My belief is that if logic dictates an answer, it'll be that the FDA had an egregiously flawed process. They changed things several times.
Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Catholic, says she's worried about the fate of other FDA-approved drugs.
For now to come back in, I think, a very political way and undermine your drug regulatory agency, I've got concerns about that. It could be this drug today, and, you know, who knows what the next one might be.
Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court could take up the case now or let the issue play out in the lower courts. Reporting outside the U.S. Supreme Court, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, as the Supreme Court decides whether women will face restrictions in getting mifepristone, the pro-abortion Biden administration has made it clear where it stands. This as pro-life advocates working to defend life push back. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, tonight the Biden administration continues to stand by what it calls the FDA's evidence-based approval of mifepristone. And today, once again in the White House press briefing room, the topic came up.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre tells reporters
the stakes could not be higher, and we are going to continue to fight. That is the commitment that this president, this administration has made, and we are going to continue to protect women's reproductive rights.
The abortion drug won FDA approval in 2000. Conditions on the drug's use have been loosened in recent years, including making it available by mail in states that allow access.
And we will continue to support FDA's independent expert authority authority to review, approve, and regulate a wide range of prescription drugs.
But the pro-life Charlotte Lozier Institute writes, major international and U.S. studies show that complications occur 4 times as often with the abortion pill compared with surgical abortion, affecting as many as 1 in 5 women who take these drugs. And yet, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, continues to downplay or ignore readily available data and put women's lives and health at risk. Also today, President Joe Biden speaks to union workers.
You're going to transform America. You, the operating engineers, are going to transform America.
The backdrop to the speech, a debate over the nation's debt limit and what happens next, with a potentially devastating blow to the economy possible if Congress fails to act. Republicans, who control the House, and the president engaged in a debate that so far has no agreement in sight.
The threat of defaulting on America's debt for the first time in 230 years. We've never, ever defaulted on the debt. And it would destroy this economy.
And while President Biden and Republicans go after each other over the debt limit, the Republican National Committee tweeted that, quote, inflation has been at or above 5% for 23 months. Real wage growth has been negative for 2 years. Gas prices are $1.28 per gallon higher than when Biden took office. The list goes on and on, end quote. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
We go down to Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, legal analyst for EWTN News. Andrea, always so great to see you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Tracy.
We have so much to unpack today, but first I want to get to the Supreme Court and the case that they are taking up today with the abortion drug mifepristone. How significant is this?
You know, Tracy, I think it's hugely significant, especially given the number and the percentages of abortions in America today that are chemical abortions. I'm really pleased with what the lower judges, what the trial judge in Texas and the Fifth Circuit has done in saying, pausing and looking very carefully, even under a tight calendar schedule, at what the FDA did in approving these drugs and lifting reasonable restrictions for their use. And it seems like the Supreme Court is taking that same serious look at what this agency has done. So I really am hopeful for a great outcome in the end.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many concerns with this drug. How do you think the Supreme Court, how do you think they may rule?
You know, it's very interesting, given the procedural posture of this case, given that it's being reviewed in an emergency basis. I do think that right now we're looking at whether or not the drug will be stayed in its kind of expansive distribution under the current FDA guidelines. That's probably most likely going to be decided in the next few days. And then we'll look at the review process in general and whether the agency's evaluation of the safety of the drug is one that's worth questioning. But I think it really does bring us back to this core issue that was given to the states, that this is something that all Americans should be paying more attention to and really opening up an important conversation, again, about the importance and the sanctity of life and the accompaniment that young women need. This is not something that we should be sending young women off alone into their houses, into their bathrooms. Unprotected and vulnerable, and instead we really need to be focusing on wrapping our arms around women that are facing unexpected pregnancies or pregnancies with difficulties.
Absolutely. Yesterday at the Supreme Court, on a different note, the justices heard arguments of a case involving a postal worker from Pennsylvania and talked to us about that case. And where do you think things are swaying on this one?
You know, Tracy, it was an exciting oral argument. It was 2 hours long, and many Americans can continue to listen to the Supreme Court oral arguments on an audio feed, even if you're not able to be in the court in person. And like you mentioned before, this is a mailman who is a Sabbatarian Christian, is unable to work on Sundays, and made that clear to his postmaster. They were able to make some scheduling changes, but eventually weren't able to. He was disciplined, he quit, and he filed suit under Title VII, which is the federal anti-discrimination and employment law. And it's about Title VII's burdens or the obligations that employers have to accommodate religious belief in the workplace that the Supreme Court's looking at. I think that the majority of justices really are honing into this key protection for religious employees, and how it comes out, we'll find out at the end of the court's term. But it really did show that this is a pro-religion and Religious Freedom Supreme Court, and that unfortunately the Biden administration that should be defending robustly religious freedom was taking the side of kind of a very narrow view of accommodating employees.
Yeah, something else very concerning that we've been talking about is the situation at Walter Reed Medical Center, where they sent a cease and desist letter to the Franciscans about providing Catholic pastoral care. Let's delve into that a little bit.
You know, it's very interesting. Walter Reed is really close to where we are right now. It is often the first stop stateside for military that are injured outside of the country. It's an important medical facility, and they only have one Army chaplain, Catholic chaplain, on staff right now, and he's in the process of leaving the military. So the Franciscans of the Holy Name were important for over 20 years. And cutting that relationship with them really does put Catholic patients in a precarious situation. The new subcontractor or the contractor is a secular outfit that promises to offer pastoral care, but whether that care is going to be directed to the specific needs of Catholic patients is still an open question. And I think that we really need to look at the great leadership of Archbishop Broglio for military services, who has really expressed very loudly his concern for the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I let you go, what other stories are you following right now, other cases?
You know, I'm paying a lot of attention to the rollbacking of religious freedom protections by the Biden administration. We've heard recently that the administration's Department of Education wants to rescind a rule protecting free inquiry, which would allow for religious student organizations on campus to be able to run according to their beliefs and choose leaders according to the tenets of their religious traditions. And the Biden administration is saying, well, that's just not necessary. The First Amendment's enough. I think that the federal government is there to help when it comes to civil rights, and it concerns me that the administration is deciding to kind of take a sideline on this important protection, especially for religious Americans.
Andrea, thank you so much for being with us and providing your expertise and your insights. We always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy.
Oh, we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including a light in the darkness. A meeting in Rome addresses sexual abuse concerns. We have a report from Rome. And defenders of the faith, what Pope Francis is saying about being a testimony to Christ. An exiled Nicaraguan bishop says attacks by the country's dictator are, quote, signs of weakness and desperation. The remarks came after President Daniel Ortega filed yet another attack against church leaders. This time, he called Bishop Rolando Alvarez, currently in prison, quote, a traitor to the homeland. Violence continued overnight in Sudan, leaving 270 people dead and over 2,000 injured. A day after a failed ceasefire, Sudan's military and its paramilitary rival have announced a second attempt. The military said in a statement the new truce is for humanitarian purposes. The World Council of Churches has weighed in on the situation and is calling for an end to the fighting. It is not clear if the new attempt will hold. Pope Francis encourages journalists to continue their work with openness and integrity in the service of truth regarding the church sex abuse scandals. The Holy Father recently held a meeting in Rome aimed at shedding light on the horrors of abuse and promoting a more effective cooperation within the church and society. Pope Francis also expressed his gratitude for the efforts made to promote transparency. Joining us now from Rome is Tina Campbell, International Safeguarding Consultant. Tina, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Can you tell us more about the meeting on abuse and what aspects in particular did you focus on?
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you. The event yesterday afternoon, From Darkness into Light, was very successful. We had, I think, almost 40 journalists present in the room. My task, my invitation was to talk about the ways in which journalists could safely engage with and communicate with victims. So I talked a little about the risk of re-traumatization, but my focus was very much also on motivation and intention, because I think they're fairly critical when victims and journalism meet, as it were.
And I understand the Holy Father invited journalists, experts, and also survivors to share their experiences. How important is the Holy Father's support and really delving into this very sensitive issue?
It's critically important, and I have to say, I saw the message that was sent from the Holy Father yesterday morning, in fact, prior to our forum meeting, and I found it deeply moving. He was incredibly supportive of those of us who are working to combat abuse and to support victims and survivors in the Catholic Church. It really was quite a profound and deeply moving message.
I know also present at the conference was Father Hans Zollner, who recently left the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, as you know. What was the reaction to this, and what else do you think can be done to, kind of face this kind of scandal?
I think I know a number of people were very disturbed and concerned that he had resigned, but the reality is that he has resigned from the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. He hasn't by any means resigned from continuing to be the safeguarding expert in the Catholic Church and to working in safeguarding in the Church. And he continues to do that by being the director of the Institute, and also he will continue to do that by being the safeguarding consultant to the Diocese of Rome. So by no means will he be doing less. I think some of the reactions are because some people, and in many ways, why should they understand, but some people who reacted quite strongly didn't really know what his role was in the Commission or indeed what the Commission was doing. And I think his concerns that he's raised are very valid, and they are shared by myself and others. And I really hope that we can work towards some sort of resolution, because we can't do this work alone. We have to work collaboratively. And it's critically important that we can do this together.
Well, Tina, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about all this. Very, very important. We appreciate it. God bless you. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, living martyrs. Pope Francis tells us to live our lives as a testimony to Christ. Plus, back to the Bills, how player Damar Hamlin is recovering after suffering cardiac arrest on the field. Pope Francis reminds the faithful that every Christian is called to use our lives as a testimony to Christ.
Non si deve mai uccidere in nome di Dio, perché per Lui siamo tutti fratelli e sorelle.
As Weekly talked to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says martyrdom is only asked of a few, but we must be prepared to defend Christ at any and every stage. Pope Francis adds that there will always be people seeking to persecute the Church, and he concluded his remarks by naming some of the recent martyrs in Yemen. A Christian pastor in Iran was released from prison earlier this month after being arrested and charged with acting against national security and promoting, quote, Zionist Christianity. Prior to his arrest in 2018, Pastor Youssef Nader-Khani was also sentenced to death for apostasy and evangelism, charges that were later dropped. And joining us now to talk more about this is Kelsey Zorzi, Director of Advocacy of Global Religious Freedom for ADF International. Kelsey, great to be with you today. For those who are not familiar with the pastor, tell us a little bit more about him, his background, and also what led to these charges and his arrest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So over a decade ago, Pastor Youssef was, as you mentioned, he was sentenced to death by hanging because he had converted from Islam to Christianity. And really miraculously, those charges were dropped. He was actually given the chance to renounce his faith, and he refused. And his legal team was able to get those charges dropped. But in 2018, like you mentioned, the police came after him again. He leads a house church of over 400 Iranians. And this was an evangelical church, and the police basically, without any legitimate charges, sentenced him to 10 years. He was very ill during this time in prison. And as you mentioned, he was just released a year early, actually, on February 26th. So we're delighted about this development.
That's wonderful news. Kelsey, as we know, Iran is considered an Islamic republic. That said, can you tell us what life is like for Christians and other religious minorities who don't practice the official state religion? What are they up against there?
Yeah, the life of religious minorities in Iran, specifically Christians and even more specifically evangelical Christians who are not recognized by the current regime, consists of a lot of hiding and a lot of secrecy. And so when they meet, they have to do that in secret. They cannot just follow their faith or live out their faith publicly. And the police really use a lot of tactics of threatening them, harassing them, perhaps questioning them and then releasing them. We know of many Christians who have been imprisoned, released, and then imprisoned again for the same crime. So they're always on their toes. They really never know what's next. And I think this is a tactic really to discourage the faith from spreading.
I want to go back to Pastor Nader Khani. How is he doing now? Do you know?
He is doing well. We can't give too many details just for security reasons, but I do have a quote from him from right after he was released. He said, "I'm happy to be released and at home after nearly 5 years in prison. I'm very grateful for all those who prayed for me and remembered me while I was in prison." And then he added at the end, "All I endured was small in comparison with what Christ has done for us."
That is beautiful, and we continue to pray for him, too. I also understand ADF International also assisted another Iranian who faced persecution for his religious beliefs, and he sought asylum in Sweden. What more can you tell us about this case?
Yeah, so we deal with a number of cases in addition to individuals in country who are being persecuted, and we deal with getting them out of the country and then seeking asylum. I can't give an exact update on the case that you mentioned, but we have a number of cases recently that we have successfully allowed people to get out of countries with government assistance, typically from Western governments that allow them in, and then we assist them through the asylum process as well.
And Kelsey, before I let you go, we have probably about a minute or so left. But are there any other cases that you all are working on that you feel that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, we have a really big case right now before the Supreme Court of Nigeria. It involves a young man. His name is Yahaya. He's a musician, and he was sentenced to death by hanging, similar to Pastor Yusuf in 2010, for simply sending a WhatsApp message that had some lyrics about his religious beliefs. That case now is before the Supreme Court. We are really hoping to overturn the Sharia blasphemy law that affects the northern states of Nigeria. It's one of the most brutal blasphemy laws on the books in the world. Just tomorrow, actually, the European Parliament is set to adopt an urgency resolution urging for his release. And we are really hopeful that before the new president of Nigeria takes office at the end of May, the current president will actually pardon Yahaya. That is what we are fervently advocating for.
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about all of this very, very important. God bless you and your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.
Finally tonight, even though it is the off-season in the NFL, one Buffalo player just made a major recovery. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin has been cleared to resume football activities. It means that he could be back on the field soon. Hamlin suffered cardiac arrest on a Monday night football game earlier this year. He graduated from a Catholic high school in Pittsburgh and has credited his recovery, at least in part, to the power of prayer. We continue praying for him, and we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.